November 22nd, 1963. Dealey Plaza, Dallas, Texas. You've seen this moment 100 times. The pink suit, the motorcade, the grassy knoll, frame 313. You could probably describe it without watching it. That's how burned into culture this moment is. But you've never seen it from here. Standing right about there on a small square of grass and concrete across the street from a man named Abraham Zapruder was another man, a federal worker on his lunch break, a home movie camera in his hands. And for 8 seconds, he had a version of the most scrutinized murder in American history that nobody else had. His name was Orville Nix. His film has been called the second most important piece of evidence in the JFK assassination. And the original film, the actual strip of celluloid that ran through his camera that day, is missing. Not classified, not sealed, missing. Nobody, not the National Archives, not the FBI, not the Nix family, can tell you with certainty where it is right now. And right now, in a courtroom, Orville Nix's granddaughter is suing the United States government to try to get it back. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you're going to understand why this one film, 8 seconds, 20-some feet of Kodachrome, might be the loose thread that unravels 60 years of official explanation. To understand why the Nix film matters, you first have to understand why it's been forgotten. Abraham Zapruder was a Dallas dressmaker who set up his Bell and Howell home movie camera on a concrete pedestal along Elm Street that morning. His 26 seconds of 8mm film became, almost overnight, the visual record of the assassination, bought by Life magazine for $150,000 within days, later acquired for millions more, and eventually the single piece of evidence every investigation, every documentary, and every conspiracy theory has been built around. But Zapruder wasn't alone. At least 4 other people in Dealey Plaza that day were also rolling film when the shots rang out. Marie Muckmore, a Dallas secretary, captured the motorcade from a spot near the Zapruder pedestal. Charles Bronson recorded the depository building from the Daltex building parking garage. Robert Hughes filmed the motorcade turning onto Houston Street moments before the shooting began. And then there was Orville Nix, the only one of the 5 whose camera was positioned on the opposite side of Elm Street from Zapruder, looking back across the plaza toward the depository and the grassy knoll. Think about what that means for a second. Zapruder was filming the president's car pass in front of him, with the depository behind it. Nix was filming from across the street, which means in his footage, the grassy knoll and the picket fence behind it are directly in frame, in the background, at the exact moment the fatal shot is fired. If there was a second gunman on the knoll, as multiple witnesses claimed that day, Nix's camera was pointed almost directly at where that gunman would have been standing. That's not a minor camera angle. That's the other half of the picture, and it's the one piece of film that's now missing. Orville Nix wasn't a photographer. He wasn't a journalist. He was 47 years old, working as a maintenance supervisor for the General Services Administration, literally a federal employee fixing federal buildings. He bought a Keystone 8mm home movie camera to film his family, birthdays, holidays, his grandchildren. On November 22nd, 1963, he took an early lunch break to go watch President Kennedy's motorcade pass through downtown Dallas, the way tens of thousands of other Dallas residents did that day. He had no idea he was about to become one of the most important and most quietly erased witnesses in American history. Nix stood on a small pedestal near the corner of Main and Houston, then moved to get a clear shot as the motorcade turned onto Elm. He started filming as the limousine came into view. 8 seconds. That's how long his film runs across the critical moment. 8 seconds where he had the depository, the overpass, the crowd, and the knoll all in a single continuous shot, filmed from an angle no other surviving film captures. He didn't know what he had. Not yet, but within hours, the Secret Service would. On November 23rd, the day after the assassination, Secret Service agents took Nix's film to have it developed and copied. Nix got his original film back. For a brief window, it was his. Then United Press International came calling. UPI purchased the rights to the film and, according to multiple accounts, took possession of the original for duplication and broadcast. Frames from the Nix film were published within days, grainy, black and white, run through newspapers across the country. For a moment, Nix's footage was almost as famous as Zapruder's. and then it started to disappear. Accounts differ, and that inconsistency is itself part of the mystery. But the through line is this. At some point in the chain of custody between UPI, later owners of the footage rights, and eventual transfer to the National Archives, the original film, not a copy, not a dupe negative, the actual film that ran through Orville Nix's camera, stopped being accounted for. By the time researchers went looking for it decades later, all that could reliably be located were copies, some of them multiple generations removed from the original, with all the loss of detail and color fidelity that implies. Somewhere between a Dallas maintenance worker's living room and a federal archive, the single clearest surviving film of the grassy knoll from the opposite angle simply stopped existing in its original form. Nobody signed a form that says lost. Nobody has ever been charged with losing it. It's just gone. Here's where the story stops sounding like fringe speculation and starts sounding like official record. In 1976, Congress formed the House Select Committee on Assassinations, HSCA, to reinvestigate the deaths of both John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. Photographic analysts on the committee examined the surviving films from Dealey Plaza, including copies of the Nix film, frame by frame. Some analysts pointed to what they described as an indistinct shape near the stockade fence on the knoll in Nix's footage, a shape some interpreted as a person, though the image quality of surviving copies made any definitive identification effectively impossible. But the more consequential finding came from a different piece of evidence entirely, an audio recording, a dictabelt, from a police motorcycle radio, which the committee's acoustic experts analyzed and concluded likely captured the sound of 4 shots, not 3, including one that appeared to originate from the grassy knoll. Based on that acoustic analysis and the broader body of evidence, the House Select Committee's final report in 1979 concluded that President Kennedy was, quote, probably assassinated as a result of conspiracy, unquote, the official position of a congressional investigative body, in print to this day. That conclusion has since been challenged. Later acoustic reanalysis in the 1980s raised serious doubts about the timing of the dictabelt, recording relative to the motorcade's actual location. The scientific debate over that specific piece of audio evidence is genuinely unresolved among researchers. But the visual evidence, Zapruder, Nix, Muckmore, Bronson, Hughes, was never given the same scrutiny it deserved, because by the time the HSCA was doing its work in the late 1970s, the original Nix film was already gone. They were working from copies. Think about that. The one federal body tasked with definitively reinvestigating this case never had access to the best possible version of one of its most important pieces of visual evidence, because it had already vanished. Which brings us to now. Gail Nix Jackson is Orville Nix's granddaughter. For years, she and her family have maintained that the National Archives, where a copy of the Nix film has been held since the 1990s after passing through various private hands, never returned the original, and that the government has failed to account for what happened to it. The Nix family has pursued this for decades through different channels, appeals to the archives, public records requests, media attention. And now, it's escalated to federal litigation, a lawsuit against the National Archives and Records Administration, seeking either the return of the original film or accountability for what happened to it. At the heart of the family's case is a simple, damning question that the government has never fully answered. If the archives has held a copy since the 1990s, where precisely is the original camera film, and what is the paper trail that shows how it got from a UPI office to wherever it is or isn't today? For the family, this isn't really about celluloid. It's about a piece of their grandfather's history, literally, physically his hands on that camera that the U.S. government took custody of and cannot produce. And for researchers, it's about something bigger. If the original still exists somewhere in a drawer or warehouse, an unmarked box, modern film restoration technology could pull details out of that Kodachrome stock that no copy, however many generations removed, could ever replicate. Color balance. Fine detail in the shadowed areas near the fence. Information that's been lost in every duplication since 1963. The lawsuit is ongoing. As of this filming, there's no final resolution. But it's forced the question back into public record for the first time in years. Where is the Nix film? And here's the part that should really unsettle you. The Nix film isn't an isolated case. It's a pattern. Take the Zapruder film itself, the gold standard of assassination evidence. even it isn't fully intact. Researchers who studied the original film sprocket holes and frame sequence have documented that certain frames, including notably frame 314, show signs of splicing inconsistent with normal, where raising long-running questions about whether frames were removed and the film respliced at some point during its early chain of custody, when Life magazine and federal investigators had access to it. Life magazine has denied any deliberate tampering, and there are innocent explanations for splice damage. Film is fragile, and it was handled, projected, and copied dozens of times in its first year alone. But the anomaly has never been fully, conclusively explained to the satisfaction of independent researchers. And it doesn't stop with film. President Kennedy's brain, preserved after the autopsy specifically so it could be examined for entry and exit wound trajectory, was reported missing from the National Archives by 1966, just 3 years later, and has never been located since. Original autopsy photographs and x-rays have documented chain of custody gaps. Witness statements were altered between initial FBI reports and final published versions. Individually, any one of these could be bureaucratic sloppiness, a perfect storm of clerical error, in an event that generated more paperwork, more evidence, and more institutional panic than almost anything in American history up to that point. But taken together, it's one of the most consistent patterns in modern American history. The physical evidence that could most directly confirm or deny a second shooter has a remarkable tendency to go missing. Here's the thing that makes the Nix story feel less like ancient history and more like a preview. 60 years later, we live in a world where ordinary bystanders with cameras have become the single most important check on official narratives of violent death. In 2009, it was a cell phone video from a Fruitvale BART platform that contradicted the initial official account of Oscar Grant's death. In 1991, it was George Holliday's camcorder footage, filmed from his apartment balcony, that showed the world what happened to Rodney King, footage the police department could not spin away. In 2020, it was a 17-year-old's phone, held steady for 9 minutes, that became the primary evidence in the killing of George Floyd, footage that anchored a criminal conviction in a way institutional reports alone almost never do. In every one of these cases, across 60 years, the pattern repeats. An ordinary person in the wrong or right place with a camera, capturing something institutions would rather have controlled alone. The difference is that in 1963, that ordinary person's evidence could be quietly absorbed into a federal building and never fully accounted for again. Today, digital footage multiplies the incidents recorded, uploaded, backed up, shared, screen recorded 1,000 times before anyone official even sees it once. Orville Nix filmed on a medium that could be seized, copied once, and lost forever. It's worth sitting with the fact that if he'd had a smartphone instead of a Keystone camera, this entire chapter of the story might not exist. There'd be nothing to lose. That's not a coincidence of the JFK case. That's the entire reason the JFK case still generates new headlines 60 years on, while more recent cases, for all their own controversies, move to trial in months, not decades. Evidence that can vanish eventually does. Evidence that can't doesn't. Today, you can stand on the exact spot where Orville Nix stood. There's no plaque, no marker, just a small stretch of grass near a concrete pedestal, across the street from where Abraham Zapruder made history with his camera. Somewhere in a warehouse, a drawer, a forgotten evidence locker, or nowhere at all, is a strip of Kodachrome film that a maintenance worker shot on his lunch break in 1963. 8 seconds of the only footage that looked directly at the grassy knoll from across the street, at the exact moment history changed. His granddaughter is still fighting to get it back. The National Archives has yet to produce it, and 60 years on, we still don't have a satisfying answer to a very simple question. How do you lose the second most important piece of film evidence in American history and never explain how? We talked today about frame 314, the anomalous splice in the Zapruder film that researchers have never been able to fully explain. What actually happened to those frames? Who had access? And why does the official version of the most watched 26 seconds in American history not perfectly match the physical film itself? That's next time on Mystery Cache. Because the Zapruder film isn't done keeping secrets either.